HubSpot has a whole app marketplace where whether it's HubSpot themselves building and managing it or another larger company that builds it, manages it, and kind of meets HubSpot standards to list it on there, that's what we would consider native.
Welcome to RevOps Champions, a podcast designed for revenue professionals looking to advance sales and marketing initiatives through the role of RevOps within their organizations. In each episode, we feature leaders who are leveraging technology to drive operational efficiency, revenue, and improve the customer experience. Listen in and learn how to become a better RevOps leader within your own organization. Let's get started.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tiffany Cavane. You are listening to the RevOps Champions podcast. And today we are going to be talking about all of those disconnected systems that we have been talking about all year long. I've got my good friend, Henry VanKampen Dufloth. He is a team member of mine here at Dynamico. And what I want to do today is I want to talk about how we actually connect those systems together. But before we dig into that, Henry, tell me just a little bit about yourself and what you do here at Dynamico.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's going to be exciting. You mentioned we're coworkers here at Dynamico. I'm a technical consultant at Dynamico. So essentially, what that boils down to is we have our solution architects that are going to architect out the solution, for lack of a better term, right? They're going to build all the flowcharts, build out, everything that you want out of your HubSpot experience. And then I'm going to be the one that actually builds it, right? I'm going to be the one that goes in and does the workflows, creates the properties, makes everything look nice and pretty. So when you jump in there, it all works like you expected, like the conversations you had with the solutions architect.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this is the little man behind the green curtain, right? He is, as well as our other technical consultants, they make all of us on the front lines look really good. They're super smart. And I'm so excited that you are here today. This conversation about connecting the data from two different systems, whether it's HubSpot is talking to a ticketing system or a financial system or another like a Salesforce where they're integrated together, that conversation can be mired in acronyms and technical jargon that a lot of us don't understand. So what I would love for us to do today, Henry, is to just break it down. We're going to walk through the process so that our listeners have this high-level understanding of what their teams are talking about when they're making a decision about connecting data from two systems together. Let's talk about one of our clients, FileWave. They're a global IT company, and they came to us in order to integrate a couple of different systems. And one of them needed an integration. Can you tell me a little bit about what their current state was and just high level and what they went through, why they made this decision to actually integrate the two rather than to try and migrate it into one system?
Yeah, absolutely. So iWave came to us. They were using a CRM called Sugar CRM. It's a fairly basic CRM. It doesn't have the prettiest interface in the world. Isn't the most what's the term I'm looking for? It doesn't have the best usability, right? And that was kind of their front end. That's what their sales and their service teams were using. Their technical teams were using two different platforms at the back end. They were using Jira, which many of our listeners may be familiar with. It's a pretty big program. And then they were using an SSO platform called KeyCloak. Now, SSO is single sign-on. It's just security, essentially, for FileWave. Now, what they were doing is the salespeople and the service people would be using Sugar, and they would be making their deals, going through and going through their tickets and all of that stuff. And then once they close the deal, essentially what FileWave does is they allow companies and school districts, stuff like that, to manage devices, right? And with managing devices, you have to work with like admins and stuff like that. And sometimes those admins run into technical challenges that they need to submit tickets for. Sometimes they need to do learnings on their side, stuff like that. And even to just get into the software, they need to be able to log in. So that's kind of where the SSO and Jira kind of come in, is when you sell that deal, when this FileWave rep or whomever sells that deal, the admins now have access to the software that they purchased, right? So they have to create an account, and that's where the SSO comes in, right? You create your single sign-on, and then with that, they can log into their software. They can go and see teachings, right, on how to use the software appropriately, and submit tickets if something's not working, or, they have questions or anything like that. So at the time when they were on Sugar, they had worked with a European development group to essentially build out this custom integration, right? And we'll get into kind of what that means, but
we're already mired in
integration.
acronyms.
Yes, we're already there. SSO, custom integration, we're starting out strong. Yeah, so they had built this kind of in the background, and it was always running, right? So when someone was created into their Sugar system, and a deal was closed, they would get some automatic emails and stuff sent out, and an account in their SSO platform and Keycloak was created for them automatically. So no IT professional had to go in there necessarily and manually create it. But the way that it was built out worked for FileWave at the time of when FileWave built it out. But as we all know, companies grow, companies change, right? Processes change. But FileWave themselves didn't have anyone on staff or that had the capacity to go in and edit this, right? Change it as that company grew. So they were running into a lot of data loss, frankly. I would say maybe 90% of the contacts went through correctly or something to that regard. But there was people falling through the cracks, or, hey, I updated this in Sugar and it should have updated in FileWave, in the SSO platform, but it didn't for one reason or another. So it was kind of building up for FileWave that they couldn't edit this custom integration, but they were now having to bring on people to just kind of manage those contacts that fell through the gap.
Band-aids.
Exactly. Band-aids. And it was getting very overwhelming and difficult for them. And it was very hard to plan for the future, right? Because you're having to bring on new people. And as you expand, as you want to sell more contracts, now you have to deal with, okay, who's going to be in the back end to support just this clerical issue?
Right.
So
what I heard is they've got these two systems. They were talking to each other, but it was a very custom built scenario, and it was expensive to maintain. They didn't have the staff to in-house to maintain that. They had to go out to an external developer, and it limited their ability to grow. Is that the right summary for?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So there's another example that I want to use because it's a little bit of a different. So our local nonprofit that helps kids get meals when they can't get them at home, every meal, they have a little bit of a different scenario where they had an integration, but they did something different in that case. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, essentially when every meal came to us, they were working with a lot of different fragmented systems, right? They were working predominantly out of NetSuite, but they also had CRM, Little Green Light, I believe is what it's called. It's specifically for nonprofit companies. And then they were using other like form websites, stuff like that. And so they really wanted to leverage HubSpot, right? To bring everyone into one place. But the main problem we were running into is HubSpot at the time of this recording, I guess, doesn't really handle some of that logistics backside stuff, right? So you can sell a deal, if you will, or work with a church or a school or whatnot to bring food to children, but there has to be some logistics behind that, right? Someone has to go grab that food off of a shelf. That inventory needs to be managed, right? Someone needs to set up the driving routes.
That.
Absolutely. And like I said, HubSpot just wasn't the best platform to leverage that. And they had a lot of that already built into NetSuite.
Mm-hmm.
However, they did not like the usability of NetSuite for those front end actions, right? So that's kind of the reason they didn't just say, hey, let's just all jump into NetSuite and use it. They weren't particularly built out nor happy with kind of that interface. So they wanted to use HubSpot for their marketing efforts, for that front end usability for this front end workers, but they kind of ran into this problem. So what we ended up kind of doing was building out a low code kind of custom integration for them that allows them to do a lot of that front end stuff, some of that qualifying in HubSpot, right? Creating all of the properties and whatnot that they needed to capture on the front end, and then sending those to the back end, and then having some connections on the back end back to the front end. So if someone called in and said, "Hey, where's my order at? What's going on with this?" They had some, ability to go into HubSpot and say, "Yeah, it looks like it's going to be scheduled to be delivered next Friday," or something to that regard, without having to jump into both systems and now have two tabs and weird data in between. It's all very clean.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, this is a scenario where HubSpot and NetSuite have their own connection together, but that wasn't enough. And did your team expand on that connection, or did you just not use what we call native, right? And maybe next we'll talk about what's the difference between native and not native, because that term is thrown around a lot as well.
Yeah, for sure. So what our team did was we leveraged essentially that native integration, right? So at the time of us kind of building out the solution for every meal, they had companies and contacts could transfer between the two systems, right? So almost like a shared CRM type situation. But what we're talking about from a logistics standpoint wasn't necessarily just contacts and companies, right? We're talking about sales orders. We're talking about invoices. We're talking about, return authorizations, stuff like that, that wasn't even a part of the native integration at the time. So we leveraged it in the sense of it was much easier to get the contacts and companies, because you still have to associate contacts and companies in both systems correctly. It was easier to leverage kind of what HubSpot had built out. They're doing maintenance on it, right? They're making sure that it's working. They'll give you updates if something's wrong with it. And just the number of contacts and companies that are created in every meal system, it was just easier to do it in that sense. Also easier for every meal to manage and troubleshoot. But, we had to go and bring it a step further, right, with some more low code custom integrations, right, to get those sales orders, return authorizations, invoices created, associated with the right people and the right companies and the right properties flowing back and forth.
Boy, this just reminds me of how happy I am that there are people like you on our team that just really understand this and make it so easy for the rest of us. So you've got a lot of words have gone around here, right? Native, non-native, custom, low code, no code. Let's just take a minute or so on each one of those to define them so that our listeners have just enough of an understanding that that when they hear that, they remember. I'll also mention that this is the kind of thing that you have to hear over and over again. You can't hear it just once. And so we'll definitely have resources in the show notes that will help our listeners. If you're wanting to dig into what all of this means because you've got an active project or proposal, then we'll have those resources for you. Okay, so let's start native versus non-native. What does that mean? What's the difference between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the general context and how we use it, right, a native integration is going to be something that's offered by either a large community in terms of it's, managed by like a really big company or something like that, or it's offered by the platform that you're working on. So I'll put it in kind of our terms with HubSpot, right? HubSpot has native integrations that HubSpot developers have built out between, say, NetSuite is a good example, right? Or Salesforce, right? These are things that HubSpot as a organization, as a company is managing, is sending out updates again, like I said, if something goes wrong or if there's just general updates, right? So, HubSpot has a whole app marketplace where whether it's HubSpot themselves building and managing it or another larger company that builds it, manages it, and kind of meets HubSpot standards to list it on there, that's what we would consider native, right? It's kind of you can say it's like kind of like a plug and play kind of situation. You download it, you maybe pay whatever subscription fee may be entailed on it, and then you tweak it maybe a little bit to meet your needs, or you just let it run, right? Like WordPress, you just kind of like log in and it's kind of going, right? So that's what we consider native. Non-native are going to be really anything outside of that. That's going to be your Zapier or your make.com. integration, something that someone's going to have to go build out, right? That you can't just say, okay, cool, here, I'm logging into Make and it's ready to go, right? You have to actually put some forethought into it. You have to do some planning and get everything in the right spot. Taking even a step further, it could be, a coded integration, right? Where it's similar to what I talked about kind of with BioWave, where it's fully coded by a development team and maybe they're managing it or not. It's completely not native to the system. No other company can per se go and just grab it and use it and say, okay, we're all set.
Okay. So what I heard was native is really great when exactly what they provide meets your needs. But if you need data to talk to each other that isn't part of what they have pre-built, it's almost like a pre-built integration for you that you just kind of like a plug and play kind of thing. If you need something more than that, then that's non-native. And that these are two like high level categories of integrations. It's either native or non-native.
Right.
Did I get that correct? Okay, awesome. Now, so if you've got our native apps on one side, over on our other side of non-native, you were talking about custom. Let's talk a little bit about, you've talked about what custom means, but could you clarify the difference between custom or customization and configuration that might be within the platform itself? Because a lot of people think of that as being custom, but we're using custom in a different way. So if you could dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start with configuration, right? Configuration could be a non-native or a native app. It's really just kind of those tweaks I was mentioning, right? It may be adding some custom properties, right, that you want to add that, you may use that no other company may use, but you're not really it's not really a custom integration per se at that point. You're just kind of using the UI, using the application that's already built out for you and just kind of tweaking it, adding some stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's using last modified date instead of create date or something like that, right? These are all options generally within the native application, but you're just changing it to kind of meet your business's needs, right? Customization in the way that we use it is going to be taking it way beyond that, right? That may be that none of the options in your native integration work for you, right? You may not use last modified or create date. You may use a third date property that you manage somewhere else. And you're going to have to go out and build something to kind of go get that information, right? And or manipulate it in a specific way. So custom really is a huge umbrella, right? Of just kind of things that are outside of those little tweaks, those native integrations that you need to have to meet your business needs, essentially.
Okay. I think that makes sense. I think when I think of it as, what configuration is, I think it's something that I can just go in, and I'm going to use HubSpot as an example. I can go into the settings in HubSpot myself. I don't need a super smart techie person to help me. I can just go into the settings and say, I want my drop downs to be a little bit, or I want to show this column instead of that column, things that general users can do. So that's, in my mind, I think we're on the same page there. So that's good. I like it when we're on the same page. Okay. So you've also talked about low versus no code. Now this is relatively new to me. Zapier has been around for quite some time. I never understood until I met you that that's exactly what Zapier is a low or no code. So talk to me a little bit about what does that mean?
Yeah. So low code, no code are in converse to a fully coded custom integration, right? It's been a big thing for the last few years and it's only getting bigger, right? It's easier for a company to have an admin to go in and, make some edits on these low code integrations than it is to hire a developer full time to go and manage these applications or these custom coded applications. So Zapier is a good example of it. We use something called Trade.io as well. That's a good example of it. Essentially what it is they hit something called an endpoint generally in these, SaaS softwares, these online softwares that allow them to edit certain things, right? It could be in HubSpot's case, going and updating a deal or creating a deal, right? Or updating a contact, right? And what these low code, no code solutions do is they give you a user interface, right? To maybe add things or create workflows, right? You can kind of think of it, if you're familiar with HubSpot, or Salesforce has it as well, right? Like workflows, right? It gives you a nice visualization that there's stuff happening in the back end, right? There's code even happening in the back end that, is working through kind of what you built out. But for the admin, for the user actually building it out, they aren't having to write in JavaScript. They aren't having to write in Java or anything like that. So it's a lot simpler to manage, right? And generally with these, they have a nicer like debugging or a nicer, troubleshooting kind of situation, right? You can go in and say, okay, this step specifically failed. Whereas with your code, it's not as simple as that generally.
So is it kind of like standardized blocks of actions that you're able to call on instead of having to write that from scratch? This type of activity in the interaction between the two databases is almost like this block that you can put in place. Am I understanding
absolutely.
that correctly? And it's kind of this middle, like this person in the middle talking. I'm going to talk to one side, I'm going to talk to the other side, and it's going to go through me in this nice, seamless, easy to use and maintain fashion. Do I have that understood correctly?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's like building blocks of these, like you said, kind of individual actions, right? You have step 1, step 2, step 3.
Yeah.
Whereas with code, it could be way more complex. Step 1 could be, 5 different things could happen to it, right? In the code. Whereas, generally in these low code, no code solutions, step 1 is create the deal, right? And you may be adding properties and setting defaults and stuff like that, but it's generally just the one thing. And again, it's easier to kind of troubleshoot that way.
That's awesome. Tell me when it's appropriate to say, you know what, this low no code, it's great. I want to use it, but it's just not a good fit for this scenario. What are the scenarios where you just, you know what, custom really is the route that you want to go?
For sure. First thing I always generally think of is kind of pricing, right? So with the low code, no code solutions, you are generally kind of giving up that huge development time in the front end and it's huge price in the front end that you would have with a custom coded solution, but you're kind of spreading that out maybe a little bit over time, right? You're paying a monthly fee to Zapier or to Trade.io or anything like that you may not have in a custom coded solution, or it might be much lower in a custom coded solution. But that kind of gives you the UI that you're working with. So again, going back to it, I think price is a big one, right? Is how are these different solutions charging you, right? Is it per workflow, right? Is it per number of actions that you have in a workflow? Is it per number of times something's run through a workflow? Mm-hmm. And those are really big to consider, because something like Zapier, Make.com, even Trade.io have different pricing structures. And you kind of have to really think, okay, am I going to be able to stomach 32,000 records going through here once a month, right? And you do run into data limits sometimes where those systems will say, hey, you're overloading our servers. We're going to put you on pause until, the 24-hour cycle runs around. And is that something, again, you can stomach as a business? If it's fine, right? Maybe you run it once a month and you can kind of let it, run out until whenever, then maybe it's a reasonable thing. But if you need all 32,000 of these records up to date as much as possible down to the second, it might not be the best solution, right? There's also kind of the next thing I think of is directionality. So
there's another new word. So tell us what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So directionality is the way that the data is flowing, right? So there's single directionality, which would be like HubSpot to NetSuite, right? Where all the data is put in HubSpot first. Yep. It's put in HubSpot first, and then at some point it flows over to NetSuite, right? And then everyone's happy. Well, there's also bidirectionality, which is where a lot of integrations and stuff are going. That's going to be two ways, right? Okay. So that's going to be, hey, I go and update it in HubSpot and it sends over that update to NetSuite. But then my NetSuite team goes in there and changes something else, and that goes back over to HubSpot. And that's like kind of gluing the two systems together with specific properties and stuff like that.
And that's fun when that happens, right? You put it in one place and all of a sudden it's over there. That can be really useful if you really need that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it really comes down to what kind of both of your teams need. Like what we see a lot is HubSpot's used, still to this day as a marketing platform for a lot of people, right? And a lot of times marketers are looking for the future, looking for those new leads, right? Or maybe even cultivating some older leads, but, they generally don't need a lot of, this order shipped on this date, specific information coming back from the other system, right? They're looking at, hey, you filled out a form today with this information. Now, there may be some information that comes back, but it's not like a fully glued system, right? But yeah, going back to with the no code, low code solutions, you certainly can do bidirectionality, but again, it kind of comes down to your traffic, the number of records that are running between. If you're just doing it, maybe a nightly update for a few thousand records or, a few hundred records, that's generally fine, right? But if you're doing down to the minute, it gets kind of confusing because you may have the data flowing from one way to the other and then back, and then it gets crossed somewhere, and now you're updating the wrong records or double updating records, and it gets, really complex. Whereas with a custom coded solution, you can kind of work through those complexities and put limiters and whatnot on them. So yeah, I mean, those are kind of the two big ones. It's generally if I'm talking with a client and they're looking for a fully glued together bidirectionality solution, that's where we're going to lead towards maybe a stronger no code solution or just a fully custom coded solution. Whereas if it is just, hey, when a deal closes, I need to send out an invoice in QuickBooks or something like that. That's going to happen one time. You don't need information necessarily from QuickBooks to go back into the deal or anything like that. It's just going to be, kind of push out that information, and then QuickBooks can do whatever it needs to do.
Yeah. Well, that is a lot, but it's really helpful, I think, to kind of just understand at a high level what's going on. So what I heard, I have a couple of takeaways that I want to wrap up with, and I'm so appreciative of you helping us just break that down a little bit so that we understand it better. So my two takeaways are, number one, there's a lot of options, and it's really dependent on what you need. So you've got options when you've got a simple or some medium size or some complexity. So different pros and cons to the different options, but really understanding what it is that you need your data to do, where you need it to go, who needs to have it, who needs to see it. Understanding that is really critical to making sure you're making the right choice, because there's nothing wrong with getting to the end of the integration and putting it in your people's hands. And they're like, wait, well, where's this, right? So really thinking through that process before you make a decision is important. The second takeaway I had is, boy, this is a lot to do by yourself. So if you've got a full-on IT department that can help you with this, that's really fantastic. But if you don't, the benefits of reaching out to a partner such as yourself to help you ask all of the questions that you need to consider so that you're making the right decisions, you're using your money wisely, and in the end, you've got this seamless process. So those are my two takeaways. Is there anything that you would add to that, Henry, before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that I would add to that is, these are really complex questions, right? And sometimes it kind of comes down to, I mean, obviously it's individual to the business, but like, do I need to integrate, right? Is always the first question that you need to ask yourself, because integrating two systems, especially in now day and age, is incredibly common, incredibly easy to some degree, especially with these native integrations. But sometimes it's just not necessary. And I know that's like scary to say, and like, everything we talk about data siloing and stuff like that, but it is an important thing to ask yourself, because, you may be dealing with a CRM and something to do with health information, right? And you just can't integrate those two for one reason or another, legal reasons, stuff like that. Or, maybe it's a system that there is one person working in and they look at it once a month, right? And that's kind of goes to that cost thing. It's like, is it worth the time to integrate it if they're just, going in and checking a few boxes or something like that? So I generally say, that's the first question to ask is what are you going to be doing with this data, and does it need to be integrated? And then you kind of flow down to all of your other questions, price, stuff like that.
That's awesome. Henry, where can people find you if they just really are inspired by your level of genius?
Yeah, you can search me up on LinkedIn, right? I'm pretty active on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And then obviously reaching through Dynamico and stuff here. I work here. So yeah, if you want to work together, that's how we do it.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. And I'm sure we'll be following up with some more examples in the future. So I look forward to talking to you again. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you again next time.
Thank you for checking out this episode of RevOps Champions. This show is powered by Dynamico, a HubSpot consulting firm helping businesses level up the technology systems that power their ability to scale. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow RevOps Champions wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Or visit RevOpsChampions.com to get immediate access to all of the latest episodes.